You better make room for me. Back to Ray.
Yeah! Yeah. And what was the question?
Who is Jerry Garcia? I think Jerry wondered too.
See that girl barefoot in the lawn, whistling and singing, she's carrying on.
Here's a man who spent his whole life against the establishment, and at this point now is completely in the hands of lawyers and men in suits.
The material objects like guitars and bank accounts meant so little to Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead. This nut stuff that went on after he died, it was so not Jerry.
What's the point in going around dirty? Do these people bathe?
Are they dirty?
Yes, half of them smell so bad. I don't want to
never got
stand
that close.
Jerry was there, and you could feel his presence everywhere.
Free love and flower power. Turn on, tune in and drop out. That was the hippie scene that began in San Francisco in the 60s. Central to that scene was a rock band, the Grateful Dead.
You have audience on drugs, you have the band on drugs, you have this loud, frothing rock music that was going where rock music had never gone before.
And central to the band was a man, Jerry Garcia.
My father was Jerry Garcia, who was the lead guitarist and lead singer of the Grateful Dead, and some would call him the lead mystic of the band as well.
Oh my God.
What's this spiel, Ray? What are we talking about?
It doesn't.
Jerry
We're talking about Jerry Garcia. And what was the question? As Beethoven was a composer, Garcia was equal.
Jerry was a real caring person. You know, as long as everybody was being treated good, taken care of, you know, then he was happy.
He was a sweet guy. He was nice. He was of the light, not dark.
Jerry was an artist in the largest sense of the word, in that he used art to transform his experiences into something that he could share with people.
He's a great guy, man. I carry him with me every day.
Even hippies have to grow up. The story of Jerry Garcia is one of hippie ideals meeting harsh reality.
I think that the best way to describe the Grateful Dead would be a grand experiment that lasted for many years and then went horribly wrong.
The idea that Jerry Garcia's estate would dissolve into rancorous litigation involving the band members and his widow is just so beyond the realm of that guy's life.
The Grateful Dead were famous for living like a family, but a rather dysfunctional one.
When the Grateful Dead first started, at one point they all lived together in a house at 710 Haight-Ashbury Street.
At 710 Ashbury. This is the place where the Grateful Dead lived during their career. This was the White House of the Haight-Ashbury. And these steps, of course, have been photographed many, many times.
It was great fun because of the spontaneity of it. That was the thing that really was great about that whole thing. You get up in the morning and say, hey, you guys, let's play in the park. By that afternoon, you'd be playing in the park.
The whole Haight-Ashbury was a collection of kind of free-thinking reprobates who had turned their backs on conventional lifestyles. Here are these people, they've been growing their hair, they've been getting freaky, using drugs, and they've been smoking pot, taking LSD, and they're not part of the system. It was starting to coalesce into something.
The Grateful Dead were a hippie psychedelic band, and drugs were a way of life. In 1966, they hooked up with a bunch of crazies called the Merry Pranksters.
Are you going to tell what's bad about LSD?
Not necessarily.
Ken Kesey and his friends toured the States in an old school bus on a mission to conquer America with mind-expanding drugs.
Okay, here's what we'll do.
And it was just a bunch of friends that lived around each other and kind of hung out together and did stuff together.
Sometimes when the cuckoo's crying,
Well, the Merry Pranksters were about fun and silliness.
Pretty soon, everyone's hair started growing out of their heads, and next thing you know, they were naked.
We'd heard about Kesey and the Bus. They've been doing outrageous things for quite a while and had a big reputation for it. And for us, it seemed like a real interesting thing to go and check out.
The Grateful Dead became the house band for the Merry Pranksters, and their escapade secured them a place in American folklore.
Yes, the Merry Band of Pranksters are the stars in the movie The Acid Test.
The Grateful Dead were able to provide a place for the Merry Pranksters to have their shows and vice versa, so they were helping each other, and as they came together, it just became a Grateful Dead show / acid test.
The acid test became a rite of passage. The bus would arrive, the Grateful Dead would play, the Merry Pranksters would lace vats of soft drink with LSD, and the initiates would begin a different kind of journey, their first acid trip.
Acid was actually available. It wasn't illegal yet. You could order it from Sandoz in Switzerland. So these guys started having acid parties.
The nice thing about the acid test was that we could play or not in the acid test, and a lot of times we would get we would be too high really to play.
While young Americans were busy finding themselves, Jerry found his future wife, a Merry Prankster called Mountain Girl.
My mother is a fabulous woman named Mountain Girl, who's also, her regular name is Carolyn Adams.
She was funny, she was smart, she was hip, she could punch you, and she commanded respect in ways that other women didn't in that scene.
The hippie movement is like any other extreme action on the part of people. It'll die a natural death.
The world did move on, but the drugs stayed around, and for Jerry, they turned into a serious problem.
As time went by, certain drugs just creeped into certain people's lives, and unfortunately, in my father's life, heroin creeped in.
Mountain Girl, or Carolyn, was married to Jerry for 13 years.
Carolyn had an immense dedication to this guy, which she says was destroyed only by hard drugs, that she could live with everything except the hard drugs, and the hard drugs just ruined it all.
The couple lived apart, an arrangement which seemed to work until Jerry met an old flame, a filmmaker called Deborah Coons.
We ran into each other at the health food store. He came courting and he wanted to get married.
To marry Deborah, he had to divorce Carolyn, and the way he did it would eventually come back to haunt his estate.
My mother and father had hammered out a divorce agreement between themselves without utilizing attorneys, trying to go by their old ideals as childhood hippies, you know, and just make an easy agreement between themselves about a divorce so that my father could remarry.
The informal agreement meant Jerry would pay Carolyn $5 million in installments of $250,000 a year. Deborah became Mrs. Garcia in 1994. The man Deborah married had become an American cultural icon.
The fans, who we call deadheads, are extraordinarily loyal.
We're gonna take a ride back in the Wayback Machine, and this is a short, strange trip. Off and running. I think they're the deadheads that are so totally devoted to being deadheads that they do nothing but live the scene.
And would cross vast distances just to come to a show, and they would always see, you know, all of their best friends, so it was always like a huge family reunion.
Often you'll get a nod, you'll get a recognition, or you give a recognition. It's a nice feeling to have somebody in your family out there and meet up with them.
There's a family of people there that are just there to accept you and love you for who you are. You don't have to be anybody.
Unless you're Jerry Garcia.
I think that he just felt the responsibility to stay with the Grateful Dead and to keep it going as long as they needed him to keep it going. But I know that he didn't really want to.
He was sick to death of being Jerry Garcia. I don't think in his wildest dreams that he ever thought it would have gotten so big that they were playing in baseball stadiums to 60,000 people at a time, and that there would be another 15,000 people in the parking lot selling t-shirts with his face on them.
I knew from being with Jerry, he couldn't afford not to tour. No one bought their records, so they just had to go out there and sweat for it and build it up, fan by fan by fan.
Life on the road was taking its toll on Jerry, and he turned to an old ally.
The touring brings back all the drug stuff, because that was all, for so many years, the only way he could tour would be to do a lot of drugs.
Driving that train.
Jerry was a heavy cocaine user and had been addicted to heroin for years.
Watch your speed. Trouble ahead. Trouble behind.
We began to see that he had to stop touring because that was the way to eliminate this whole drug thing.
You would not put a man like that out on a grueling road trip and playing grueling shows for large audiences.
But they didn't want him to stop touring because they wanted to grab as much money as they could while they could. And he wanted to retire because he said, going on the road is killing me.
I guess some sad news has come our way. This morning, Jerry Garcia, our friend, my brother, passed away.
Jerry died of a heart attack at a drug rehabilitation centre near San Francisco. It was September 1995, and he had virtually cleaned up. He was 53 years old.
I think that, for me, was the saddest thing, knowing that he had died alone, you know, in a bed, you know, at a rehab, you know, with other people who are trying to dry up.
All the places he could have died, he died in a drug rehab thing. You know, and he died broke with no money.
A box of rain will ease the pain and love. You see it.
He wasn't exactly broke. His estate was valued at $5 million. But his co-executor Deborah had to fend off claims on the estate totaling $50 million.
Deborah, the widow, caused a lot of things to happen that the Grateful Dead themselves were uncomfortable with. But she's completely in charge of the Garcia estate 100%, and there's no arguing with her.
After just 18 months of marriage, Deborah tried to stop the payments to Carolyn, which she believed were too high.
He told me later how much money it was, and I said, why did you do that? He said, I would have signed anything to marry you. I would have paid anything to marry you.
Things have come a long way since the 60s.
Yes, the merry band, the Pranksters, are the stars in the movie The Acid Test.
Mountain Girl and the other merry pranksters still meet up regularly on the 4th of July.
Kneel down there, young man. Looks like you know what you're doing now. Look smart.
Almost 40 years on, they're still up to their old tricks.
Hey, who's got something they want to send off in here? Old credit cards, lottery tickets. Here's my car keys. This car keys.
Carolyn and Deborah could not be more different. When their worlds collided, there was bound to be trouble.
Look out! Look out!
We were surprised one morning to read in the newspaper that my father's widow and Bob Weir of the Grateful Dead had made a trip to India to spread my father's ashes on the Ganges River.
Bob had a dream that we should put Jerry's ashes in the Ganges. So he said that he would like to put some of Jerry's ashes in the Ganges.
He never wanted to go to India in his life. The idea of throwing those ashes in there. And then the Bob Weir was with her, I called up Bobby. He says, well, geez, I didn't think about it. Yeah, no, Bob, I guess you didn't,
And it was in the newspaper all over the world that we'd done that.
I think anybody who's lost a parent would like to be involved somewhat in the spreading of the ashes, particularly when he had wished for them to be spread in the San Francisco Bay. So we got on the phone and found out that that was not the case, that only a small pinch of the ashes had been put in the Ganges River in India.
And the rest were indeed spread in the ocean, but not without a scene.
Of course, things being as they were, my mother was not allowed to take that boat.
She called up and she said, I really, really, really want to come to do these ashes. And I said, well, no, you are not welcome.
Carolyn was a tough merry prankster who didn't take no for an answer. She arrived early and hid on the boat until she was forced off.
On the floor, there were a bunch of clown noses, red clown noses, and Groucho Marx glasses.
She thought it would be a really fine joke and that Jerry would really love it if we all wore the clown noses getting on and off the boat.
There was like 20 of these things on the floor of the cabin, and I said to someone, well, what are these? And he said, oh, Carolyn brought these.
Of course, that didn't go down too well with some members of the boat.
And her plan was to jump out and make everyone put those on for when we put the ashes in the ocean.
And then there was a rather ugly scene at the dock.
She was pacing up and down on the dock, begging people to let her come on the boat.
Ended up with Bob Weir of the Grateful Dead almost jumping out of the boat.
And the 6-foot swell's going, whoa!
It's hard to believe.
And Deborah's, going, get out of here now! And the captain's going, okay, and pulling away from the dock and heading out with MG behind yelling, this is family! This is family!
Then she started crying, and she was like crying.
It's so not in the memory of the guy.
My father, he would have been terribly embarrassed. I think he would have really liked everybody to just hang it up and just, have a nice day out and kiss him goodbye.
Once Jerry was laid to rest, the nitty-gritty of Deborah's work as a co-executor began.
The widow was in charge of the estate. She was the executor, so she had the right to look at the debts and look at the money and say, I don't think that's good. And if she felt she had a shot of getting it lowered, she had every right to go to court to make that happen.
And it wasn't fair and all this stuff, so we were fighting it, which was appropriate. And as co-executor, I had to fight it because that's what you have to do. You have to protect the estate.
Deborah claimed that Carolyn's was a marriage of convenience to help Jerry save in taxes. She also questioned the legality of the free and easy divorce settlement the two had made.
Our mom and dad had come up with this agreement between each other. It should have been honored one way or the other. It was very hard to see our family history up on court like that. It was very, very embarrassing.
Well, it's been very difficult for the family to bring our personal lives into the public forum like this, and we think that this is just ongoing part of a long-term personal vendetta between the widow and my mother.
They ruled in Carolyn's favor, and she ended up with a sizable amount of money.
She ended up settling for $1.2 million instead of $5 million.
Deborah had to acknowledge Carolyn's position in Garcia's life, which was probably more important to Carolyn than the money.
The dispute with Carolyn was settled, but now other claims on the estate came out of the woodwork.
There were women, like 4 different women who wanted money.
One of them was a handwritten document from a strange woman who had claimed that she had had my father's child a year after he had died, which of course doesn't really work. And she demanded, I think it says on the paper, she demanded between $5 million or $5 billion.
And then there was the art dealers, one of them for $12 million, one of them for $15 million.
One man, claiming to be a roadie, even demanded money for nursing Jerry down from a bad acid trip.
I think a lot of people just saw the fact that an easy way to make money had left them, so they were able to stake claims for what they thought they were owed.
Though there were $50 million of claims on the estate, Deborah managed to whittle them down to just $700,000.
Watch your speed, trouble ahead, trouble behind, and know that notion just crossed my mind.
I do regret that I didn't see the will before he died. But if I had, I would have said, you know, honey, let's go to a really, really good lawyer and decide if this is the best way to do things.
But Jerry had done things his way.
Doug Irwin is the only person who's not related to Jerry Garcia who's named in Jerry's will.
Sometime after Jerry died, a friend of mine came by and said, well, how's it feel to be a millionaire? And I said, well, I couldn't tell you. He said, well, you're in Jerry's will. And I was surprised.
He had guitars made by a fellow named Doug Irwin, who was a brilliant, and still is, a brilliant guitar maker. And he requested in his will that those guitars be returned to Doug Irwin to do with as he pleased. That's just another sign of his generosity.
The Doug Irwin guitars were unique. They were hand-built to Jerry's specification. He gave each a name, and they were almost members of the band.
My dad's 2 favorite guitars were a guitar called Wolf and a guitar called Tiger. Doug Irwin made them both.
It all began when Jerry turned up at Doug's guitar shop.
That's when somebody came back and said, oh, well, Jerry Garcia's out there, he wants to buy your guitar. And I went out and he asked me, how much do you want for it? Well, $850. And he said, okay. I thought, wow.
Doug Irwin put just a tremendous amount of love into the creation of those instruments, and they sounded great.
Tiger was the cutting edge of guitar, a handmade guitar at that era.
It was built over about a 5-year period, and about 2,000 hours actually into that instrument.
The most Doug charged Jerry for the early guitars was a couple of $1,000. No one could predict what they'd be worth once the rock icon had died.
In September of 1995, Grateful Dead got together and realized that Jerry Garcia's guitars were heirlooms. And giving them to Doug Irwin didn't sit well with everybody at Grateful Dead.
They said, well, those weren't Jerry's guitars, those were the band's. I said, well, that's absurd.
It got into this huge legal McGill as to whether the band owned them or whether Jerry Garcia could even legally give them to Irwin.
They were clearly all his guitars. I mean, my contracts were directly with Jerry, and he paid for significant portions of a lot of the guitars.
It got the band a tremendous amount of bad publicity.
And I had to ask him, I said, well, you know, now that Jerry's dead, you guys think you can just steal his guitars?
Typical of my father, he did not bother to check the truth behind who owned those guitars. He was under the assumption that he owned every single one of those guitars outright, free and clear, no ties to anything.
You know, these guys all heard Jerry tell me once on stage, you know, that, hey, when I pass away, you're going to be getting these guitars. Nobody jumped up and said, hey, man, you can't give those guitars away. Those aren't yours.
When he couldn't get the guitars back, Doug took the band to court and sued.
And I had to remind him that, you know, when you guys get to the other side, Jerry's going to beat the snot out of you guys.
Meanwhile, back in this world,
I designed this. It's a Jerry doll, and it's really cute, and I think of it as Widow's Revenge.
Hey, what the is that?
Jerry's estate itself is now run by committee, but Deborah handles the Jerry Garcia merchandising industry.
Sugar magnolia, blossoms blooming.
It's a business that began when he was still alive.
The ice cream has been lucrative, and it was completely surprising, and Jerry felt like that was sort of like money from heaven. It just kind of appeared. He didn't have to work for it. It was like, I think at the time, he was getting $60,000 a year from the ice cream.
That's now risen to $400,000 a year. Business is booming.
Things have grown since his death because we put more attention to it, and we've actually negotiated a much better percentage for the estate than when Jerry was alive. We're making a lot more income from it, and it keeps growing. This is cool. It's a continuation of what Jerry did during his lifetime, which was this really interesting mix of art and commerce. What's interesting is the ties and the ice cream make more money than the music, and that's our biggest selling thing. The ties make around $1 million a year. We do things that are cool. This is one thing I did because I figured that Jerry was a rock star.
Grateful Dead made an offer to Doug Irwin that he could have Wolf and Tiger, and Doug would give up Rosebud and Wolf Jr. Doug finally decided to split and do the Solomon-like thing and give up 2 and keep 2. He got the bigger half.
Which he instantly turned around and sold.
Selling once.
Like that.
Selling twice.
One of them's disappeared off the face of the earth.
Selling to this side.
And the other's owned by a professional sports team owner who plays it in Thursday night jam sessions with his buddies in Indianapolis.
Sold here for $850,000.
And I wasn't really thinking of nailing Jerry's guitars up over the fireplace mantel, so it makes sense that I would sell them.
They were sold for the highest amount any guitar's ever been sold for.
At auction, Tiger fetched over $957,000 and Wolf was sold for just short of $800,000.
We were supportive of him, and on the Jerry Garcia website, we did an interview with him. And then his lawyer convinced him to try to sue us to pay his taxes. It's like if you inherit something from someone and then you sell it, you pay the taxes. But he's trying to get us to pay the taxes. $700,000 in taxes? That's a lot of bread. So I was like, take the interview off the website. He's gone.
I think he will be remembered for his music and remembered as a lesson, to live your life and have as much fun as possible. But right before you die, you should really do something for your family. You should set it up better than you've done. If you think that you've got it done, check again. You might have missed something like the guitars, Correct myself up too much on that
one. Next week, the king of pop art, Andy Warhol, wanted his fortune to go to a foundation for struggling artists. Instead, millions of dollars were wasted in legal disputes between the very people supposed to set it up.